Happy Thanksgiving. We all have something to be thankful for here today. Here is the first of specials I produced on The Expanse, and that in a moment. This is a special series of inner workings, and these will have multiple episodes on The Expanse. It's the best SF or sci-fi television show if you wish. Although now not on television as we know it. It is now on Amazon Prime. And we'll kind of go into that a little bit when the time comes. Our first episode focuses on two reluctant heroes, Jim Holden, the first officer on a freighter, the Canterbury, who, upon hearing a distress call, his life is changed forever. Circumstances force him into a leadership role that he is very reluctant to take on, but does. Naomi Nagata is also on the Canterbury, a former resident of the asteroid belt, and very tied to her fellow Belters, and perhaps has a murky past, maybe in some kind of intelligence role. Here is Stephen Strait.
So take us into the head of your character. I mean, he's out on a freighter somewhere.
Sure.
He obviously has ambitions like anybody else.
Yeah.
What's his mindset right now when we first meet him?
When you first meet James Holden, I mean, he's the second officer on an ice hauler, which is like an oil tanker. He is from Earth. He's put himself out in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of other misfits who are trying to run from their past. He has spent his whole life not wanting to answer to anybody. I mean, he has a huge problem with authority and doesn't want a lot of responsibility over people. He's very happy where he is, being the second officer, doesn't want to be the captain. You know, like the captain keeps trying to offer him promotions. He keeps turning them down. He's like, I'm good, thank you very much. But the amazing thing about Jim is that he does have a solid moral compass, and he does do the right thing when push comes to shove. And you know, he answers this distress call, which is the right thing to do, and it gets inadvertently pulled into this much larger conspiracy that he had no idea that he would ever be involved in. And by accident, he becomes kind of the face of this kind of movement, this revolutionary movement. He becomes this bizarre kind of figure within the solar system that he's got to own now. And you know, for me as an actor, it's an incredible arc to play with. I mean, so many colors, you know, because he's being, you know, literally like pulled up like into these crazy situations that he has to live up to.
Yeah, sure.
It was so fun. And the writing is amazing. I mean, you know, Mark and Hawk, who were the heads of our writers' room, they wrote Children of Men, you know, nominated for that, Iron Man.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like, incredible stuff. So, you know, we had the luxury of having amazing actors to work with every day.
Here is Dominique Tipper talking about her character. She has many different sides, and that's what I love about her.
She's strong, but she is, because of what's happened in her past, she's run away from her identity initially. So there is always this question of who she is, who her allegiance is to, and where she sits in it. And I think it's a little different how it plays out in my own life, but there is still that thing of being half white and half black. And I feel like I'm constantly projected upon, but also questioned about which side I am more affiliated with. And it's a weird thing that I've ended up playing a character where tribally that's also reflected, and it's not lost on me, the irony of it. But yeah, it's been, dare I say it, quite therapeutic actually to play it out in the show in this allegorical way, without it being a race thing, because I feel quite sure of who I am as a mixed race woman. I feel like society puts on me all these other things that I'm constantly being like pulled between. So yeah, with Naomi, it plays out in a different way, and I don't think she's maybe as sure as I am. But then maybe that's just me saying that, who knows. What's funny about Holden and Naomi is they're both reluctant leaders, right? Like, but where they differ is their ideologies, and but they both kind of don't really want to lead. But she's thrown into a situation where he can't, so she has to. And what you actually see is her idea of leadership is holding on to everyone's humanity. So after these awful events on Eros, you open the season with Naomi kind of having to deliver certain types of news to the guys, and very much trying to just keep their heart there, because everyone's tainted from what they saw, and again, belters get the rough deal, and everyone's so angry and upset and affected by it. And so she just tries to hold on to everyone's humanity. But what's interesting is that has its toll on her, and that then plays out in the season. It's got to affect her some way. And you kind of see the consequences of her leadership early in the season affect her later on. And it's awesome to play. It's been a beautiful arc, and I think everyone's going to love it. It was interesting to challenge for Naomi when she was actually put in a position of leadership, because up until now she's just been clashing with Holden. So when she was in the tunnels, it was like, oh no, now I do actually have to take charge. And then there wasn't an option to be wrong, which I think she really struggled with Sema Timber just in her ear the whole time. And that was great, and I loved it.
Yeah, it was great to shoot. I mean, you know, the gravity of what's going on Eros at the end is so huge. You know, it's this awful, horrific genocide. People are being experimented on, essentially. Hundreds of thousands of people. And, you know, making sure that landed in the most realistic way possible was paramount, because the effects of what's gone on there for all of his characters informs everything. So, like, for Holden, for example, he's heavily traumatized by what's gone on. I mean, he and Miller are really the only ones who really saw what this does to people. And they were irradiated themselves, and they barely kind of got out alive. And then, you know, with Holden, he feels partially responsible for some of this. I mean, like, he was the one who knocked the first domino, and this cascade of events, you know, ends up with this enormously awful thing that he feels partially responsible for. And, you know, the first time you see Holden this season, he has a PTSD attack. That's the first thing you see. It's like he is in the middle of a nightmare. And I spoke to one of the heads of psychology for the Canadian military before I started, because when you're portraying these things, you want to do it as respectfully as possible for the people who have actually gone through this stuff. I talked to him about the effects of the genocide in Rwanda on the peacekeepers who weren't allowed to do anything about it, and the hopelessness and the kind of helplessness that they felt, and what that did to their psychology. And what it does for Holden is that it pushes him into this kind of myopic focus that really drives him to the brink of madness by the end of this season. And the proto-molecule, and I hate to use this metaphor, but it's the only one that really kind of works in my head, is this kind of Ahabish thing where the proto-molecule is like his whale, and he just can't stop until he figures out how to get rid of it. And everything else is secondary. Everyone else's lives are secondary. It's all about this. And that really drives a huge wedge between, obviously, it informs you as a captain and as a man and as a lover and as a friend to these people, as a son. It was a very intense thing to play at the end of last season, but it was so important to nail it, because all the rest of this character development this year wouldn't have worked otherwise. It was great to shoot that.
Long story short,
had a great time.
Awesome.
The season 1 finale had the Rossi crew on a space station, used for an experiment that revealed a new life form, the proto-molecule, which is dangerous to humans. As a refresher, what was it like to design the proto-molecule? Here's executive producer Naren Shankar and also executive producer Hawk Otsby.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about that, because I think in the book it's described as sort of a black thing, and it's, part of the problem was, especially in this genre, you're going to get compared to the black oil alien in the X-Files. You're going to get compared to so many different things. So, and Ty and Daniel were part of these discussions. What we wanted to do was create a unique look for what this was, and so it was after a lot of discussion, a lot of concept work, and this is where we ended up.
Yeah, I think we found a look that, because it's really hard to get past Ridley Scott Alien like that. Like everybody stopped at the Geiger influence kind of, and we're like, it's beautiful and it's indelible. We have to do something that's our own, and so we did really try to design something. And the beauty of it is, the proto-molecule is not a static thing. It continues to become something. So it's not just going to look like one thing and be one thing.
There's a practical consideration as well. If you've seen the show, you know we operate in very low light levels. There's a lot of darkness. Black on black doesn't film so well.
Now that shuttle crew that went to investigate that call is on the run after the destruction of the Canterbury. Holden and his crew renamed and also refit the shuttle to be called the Rosamante. But what they do uncover is a deeper conspiracy. In Season 2, Holden and Naomi make a connection.
Finally, Naomi and Holden bite the bullet and start to like each other a lot. No, I think what actually happened is not that romantic. I think with the events at the end of Season 1 and the traumatic almost genocide that they all witness, they cling to each other, and they just need someone, and I think they choose each other, and the rest, it goes on from there.
Yeah, I love the way the dynamic plays out, because it really feels so honest and real. You know, it's like you see these two characters who've gone through these horrific experiences and just been thrown all over the place in the first season, and are really the kind of victim of the plot as opposed to being the ones who are pushing it. These two are clinging to each other for their humanity. And it's like, it's that moment where you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're completely overwhelmed and you don't even know how to take into account what you've witnessed and been through. And there's only a few other people within our story who have experienced the same thing, and they just grab each other and cling to that. And it's like just holding on to dear life, literally. But you know, what happens through that arc is really, I found it really kind of beautiful, because it's a very untraditional romantic arc that I was really fun to kind of play with.
Yeah,
you know?
What's interesting is the conflict of the universe plays out between the two of them. So what brings them together and what kind of gets between them is what's going on in the universe. So you kind of see it play out between them. It's like mimicked. Because for Naomi this season, very much her arc is choosing where her loyalties lie and who she is as this belter that's not really a belter anymore. You know, is she OPA? Is she not OPA? What's right and wrong for her? And she has some really difficult decisions to make, and a lot of them are still in conflict with Holden's ideas of what he holds for the universe being an Earther. It's like he doesn't understand where we come from being a belter. So that is really difficult for them, and you get to watch it play out over the course of the season, and it's so cool because it isn't just like they fall in love and then all is well in the world. It's like it's another step into their relationship and another thing that they have to figure out, and they're a bit like, hang on, I thought, okay. And that happens a lot in Season 2.
Yeah. You know, particularly with the Rossi crew, you know, when you meet them on the Canterbury in the beginning, it's established that everyone on that ship is essentially running from something. And everyone on the ship, even within the Rossi crew, are holding their cards really close to their chests. So when these two become more intimate, suddenly you get to learn a little bit more about who you're with. I mean, they've just been trying to survive up until this point. But then, you know, political philosophies, it's a heavily political show, and you know, we come from very different places with that philosophy. So, you know, it's something that the crew itself needs to work through, and it again is a kind of you know, a smaller scale version of what's going on in the greater solar system at large.
Hey, thank you for listening to Sci-Fi Talk, but stick around, I have more. Let's get back to Sci-Fi Talk. I'm Tony Tellado. To those reluctant leaders, their relationship grows more in Season 3 and the upcoming Season 4. Here are Dominique Tipper and Stephen Strait.
I just mean there's some really beautiful moments where I think they've really settled into who they are as a couple, and I think you see that play out in between all these other crazy moments in the show, and there are some of my favourite moments between them. Little scenes that are just like so delightfully close, and I think you really get to see how much they've evolved as a couple, and then where they're at now, still with all the other things that's, you know, essentially against them. And I think it's interesting with Naomi's journey, with her constant search for who she is. I think that's a really hard thing to do when you're in a relationship. And I think that they've survived this, like, her constant search for her identity, especially with the fact that he's not a belter and he doesn't fully understand it. It's quite, you know, being a black woman and dating a white, you know, like it kind of leans into that as well. And I think it's a really good kind of representation of what that is like when you date outside your race, and the problems it can bring, the lack of understanding. I like that we get to play that out on an allegorical level with tribalism. So yeah, but this is a really beautiful season for them, I think.
This family has gone through so much, and you know, they've survived because of each other. You know, they survived not just in the physical sense, but in the mental and emotional sense as well. You know, this group of people have clung to each other, especially Holden and Naomi. I mean, she's the only thing that kept him sane through the last half of season 3, and in a literal sense. And you know, this year, I think, you know, just to add to what Dom said, is that you really see them settled into their family. And it's funny, just, you know, as actors on this show that started working together over 5 years ago, you know, the intimacy and the closeness that we have in real life has reflected that. You know, you see it on screen, and, like, you know, we didn't know each other, all of us, when we started this journey together. The intimacy has mirrored real life in so many ways, you know. And we've had this very unusual journey as a production, you know. I mean, so, like, there's so many parallels to the story itself that I think have informed each other, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to portray.
Holden and Naomi are in a very different place in season 4.
You see Holden this year more settled into his responsibilities. Mm-hmm. You know, we were talking earlier just about. You know, having been a fan of the books before we started shooting this series, what I love so much about Holden's character is that within the plot structure, it's very unusual. It's a very unusual hero arc, right, where, you know, he grows through mistakes and he grows through humility. He becomes stronger and a better leader through humility. Yeah. And, you know, he, at this point, is comfortable with the fact that he has this singular circumstance of being in communication with this ancient civilization and what that means and the responsibility that brings. But he's also trusted by all sides, really, because he feels impartial. You know, Avasarala sends the Rossi. She allows the Rossi through the ring, right, but they're not there on behalf of Earth necessarily. Okay. Yeah, the RCE is there on behalf of Earth.
Right, that's true.
But they are the experts in the field on what the proto-molecule is. And again, you know, they're there in the beginning of this season specifically to investigate the ruins.
Right.
That gets really complicated very quickly. Through the challenges that Holden has had throughout the seasons, he's become the leader that's needed. Right. And it's been so lovely for me as an actor, because it's a really unusual circumstance to have an arc that you kind of need 4 or 5 seasons to really even see. Yeah. You know, it's just vast change. And you know, if it was just 2 seasons, you'd see like the first 1/8 of it. Right. Because he's had some really ugly moments, and he's had some very fragile moments, and you've seen him in very vulnerable places, and he's relied on his relationships to get through, and he's come out the other side strong. And you know, I think you do see that this year, is that that resilience pays dividends in this season in a very dramatic way.
I always hope that, because this show is so risky and gives us the stuff to do, like the stuff you want to do as an actor, but that's not without, like, I just hope that I can always fulfill on what they give me, because there's no sitting in like the easy lane of Naomi could walk around all day being like the smartest person on the ship and blah, 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 and telling everyone what to do. But because she has so many layers and she's flawed and she has this history that's like always biting at her ass, my challenge is that, you know, my own like imposter syndrome of just being like, hope I do a great job and do the character justice and tell this story that is not similar to my own life experience in the way that for people that it serves them. That's for me always the challenge. I always come in being like, hope I'm going to be good this season. I don't know. That's like probably the simplest thing that I find challenging. I was a backup dancer for 12 years, but dealing with like her physicality in this season and that first episode is really different to what my life was like as a dancer. Like, I think you would think it was transfer and you'd be like, yeah, she's got this, but that was really hard for me, like to keep, there's a constant bogging down of like a thing that's not under her control because of the environment she's in, and it reduces her power. And it's interesting to play something where the reduction in power is out of her control and it's environmental rather than like a person-to-person thing, because she is such a force of nature. So that was that, and she's put herself in it. Yeah. So that was a challenge within itself. Like,
Naomi seems to be always in the same place.
It's interesting because in the books, Naomi doesn't go to the surface. So it is a thing that they put in the show that I think makes the whole thing much more interesting, is that she is in the middle, and she seems to always be. There's always this question of her identity, which is interesting being mixed race. So she's always trying to straddle and do the right thing, but I think essentially she does not do well with injustice, and I think that is always the deciding factor for her, and it skews more Belter because that's who she is. So there's some really cool interactions with her and other characters based on her being in the middle of the whole conflict.
And that is episode 1 of Inner Workings on the Expanse. There'll be multiple episodes on this breakthrough show that really has taken SF to an adult level on television. And it's just the quality of it and the writing is so good. Even after the original showrunners have left, it's still high quality. Naren Shankar is now the showrunner, and he has an extensive background going back to Star Trek The Next Generation when he was the science consultant, but he also ended up flexing his writing skills on that show, and it led to work on this particular program. That's it for this episode 1 of Inner Workings on the Expanse. There'll be multiple episodes on this breakthrough show that really has taken SF to an adult level on television. And it's just the quality of it and the writing is so good. Even after the original showrunners have left, it's still high quality. Naren Shankar is now the showrunner, and he has an extensive background going back to Star Trek The Next Generation when he was the science consultant, but he also ended up flexing his writing skills on that show, and it led to work on this particular program. That's it for this episode of The Inner Workings on the Expanse. This is Tony Tolato. Thanks for listening.